Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Occult Think Tank. My name is Greg. In this program, I am going to be talking about religious belief, alien belief, and delusional disorder. This is a subject that I have very rarely talked about because when all of this came down at near the end of 2008 to early 2009, I was specifically told by the Army to shut the fuck up about the alien subject. The subject of aliens is one that is greatly hidden or concealed by not just the United States government, but all the world's governments. It is a subject that is very taboo. There are countless videos of flying saucers and so forth basically running circles around the best ships and planes that we have. There is also looking like a push towards what is termed disclosure, where people are going to be coming forward and have started coming forward from places like the military and so forth, giving accounts of aliens disarming nuclear devices and so forth without ever landing, from doing it totally from space, from flying over a missile base. Those reports have come from very high-ranking military officers, and while the general public may roll their eyes at a high-ranking military officer making a report about aliens, as somebody that was in the military, when an officer is giving a report, to my brain, you shut the fuck up and listen, because information is being put out that you're going to need to hear. Officers in the military do not get to be officers by buying into claims without evidence. Although there are many officers in the United States military that do believe in a God or whatnot, or have a religious belief. Religion gets a pass when it comes to delusional disorder, and that is something I will be getting to in this, because that became a core part of my battle with the Army on the alien subject. When I went in 2006, I did not tell them that in my 20s I had missing time. I didn't talk about it because it didn't relate to my enlisting in 2006. I knew even then that mentioning anything with aliens would shoot myself in the foot regarding getting into the military, because there is a very big and very open prejudice regarding the subject of extraterrestrials and even UFOs. Regardless of how much evidence we have that these things actually exist, there is a push for disclosure that is coming, and it is something that I feel is long overdue. But when I went in 2006, before going to basic, I had resumed my research into the Anunnaki. It wasn't anything that resulted in any type of weird behavior before going through basic and so forth. And when I went into basic and AIT, for those that don't know, is advanced individual training. It is in the military, it is where you are trained in whatever your job is going to be. The job in the military is termed your MOS. My MOS was going to be an 88 mic, truck driver, transportation. I didn't talk about my research into the Anunnaki or any of that when I was at basic, because it didn't relate to basic. But when I got out of AIT and was back home, I resumed my research into the Anunnaki because I had the thought of what language did Adam and Eve speak, and it drew my attention to the subject of the Enochian language, which is supposedly a language of aliens, or not aliens, angels. But I contend that the alien subject and the angel subject are really talking about the same thing. That one is just put into religious classifications, while the other is put into the idea of being delusional, which that is showing the clear prejudice that there is regarding the subject of aliens, regardless of how much concrete evidence we have that there are intelligently operated UFOs in our skies. The thing is, when I started doing my research again in 2006, when I got out of AIT, I didn't immediately notice anything weird, but there was a point a couple months into it. I had a girlfriend at the time that was a black woman. She stopped over at my place, and she was sitting on my bed behind me, and she started wiping the back of my neck and she had said, "You are bleeding." She was freaked out. Both her and I were, at the time, were atheists. And as far as I know, she still is, and I still am. But she was freaked out that I had blood coming out of my neck for apparently no reason. And it was shortly after that. I don't remember if my shirt was off or if she had me take it off, but I ended up taking my shirt off, and she noticed on my back I had a scratch going from my spine to my left shoulder. And on my left arm, I had two scratches that were about an inch long and about an inch apart, going down my bicep. She asked me what I had been into, and I said, "I don't know, I just woke up." I didn't have any memory of anything that would be related to that. Well, right after that, I started to feel a hole at the back of my neck. I went to my drill when I had Army drill next. I went in, and I think it was even before formation. I was standing with the guys from my unit out in front of our barracks, and I was smoking with some of them, and I had taken off my Army cap, and I lowered my head and pointed to the back of my neck, and I asked them, "What do you guys see?" And they said, "You have a circular hole on the back of your neck." And they said, "It's healing." And then they blew it off. And I had held up a cigarette, and I had said, "Is it as round as this?" And they were like, "Yes, it's a perfect circle." I was like, "Oh shit." And they asked me about my reaction. And I told them that back in my 20s, I had seen a similar mark, but that one was on my right knee. And I had said it is the classic, what is termed alien scoop mark, which led right into the rabbit hole of missing time, alien abduction, and all of that. I would openly talk about that type of thing, telling people in the Army and so forth, and those that were around me, what I knew about the subject of aliens. And it was something that there came a point where I had encountered a chaplain, and as a general rule, I don't talk to chaplains or the religious. I didn't especially when I was in the Army, out of my way to have a conversation with a religious person, because it would only result in a difference of opinion, that I look at things in a different way than the religious do. So it was not a conversation that I was looking to, at that time, to have. But when I encountered this chaplain, I did, for whatever reason, decide to inquire as to what he knew about the Sumerians and ancient Sumer, especially because there was a high degree of probability that my unit was going to be going to Iraq, and I think I even mentioned to him that Sumer became known as Babylon. Babylon is now called Iraq, and it was that location was essentially the home or the starting point of the Anunnaki, back with the ancient Sumerians. And for those that are unaware of who the Anunnaki are and what this relates to, the epic of creation is not a Jewish or Christian story. It goes back a lot further. The epic of creation is a Sumerian story. It deals with two brothers, Enki and Enlil. Enki was the one that did the genetic engineering. This gets into what is termed ancient alien theory, that Enki is the one that was responsible for what essentially would be the creation of us. Now, why we were created and so forth, that's a totally different rabbit hole that I'll go down later. Not right now. Enlil was his brother, and he did not have the same fondness for humans that Enki did. There were disagreements between the brothers as to what should be done with the humans that Enki had created. This does get into all of the Adam, Eve, and all of that story and the why they were created type of thing. But I had asked the chaplain about the Sumerians and Anunnaki, and the chaplain had basically blown me off and said, I need to do more research before I can talk to you about this. Which, yeah, that was a shot for my ego, that this chaplain didn't know enough about the subject to talk to me. I think in hindsight it was more one of, he didn't want to tell a lowly private, a PFC, anything about the subject of the Sumerians or the Anunnaki. It also became an issue in late 2008, when my unit was going to be preparing to go to Iraq, because we had normally in the summer, we would do a summer camp. It is called summer camp because when you're in the reserves or National Guard, you have 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year. The 2 weeks are typically in the summer. That's why it's called summer camp. But because my unit was going to be going to Iraq, it wasn't a 2-week, but a 3-week. And during that entire 3-week period, all of us were on base. We couldn't leave, because a lot of times on the drill weekends, they would give you the option of, if you want to go home, just be back for formation at a particular time. And as long as people didn't go AWOL, there wasn't an issue. And that didn't happen as far as I know. But on the 3-week summer camp, we were on, to use the term, lockdown on base, which means nothing bad. I mean, it was just every night we would sleep in the barracks. And I had the thought at that time of, as far as from the alien issue that I was dealing with in my home life, I had the thought of, well, as long as I'm on the Army base, I'll be safe. I'll be fine. Because I had never had any encounter or missing time when I was in the military and actively with the military. About halfway through that 3-week period, that fantasy was blown to hell. Because I went to sleep one night like I usually did, and this particular night, when I woke up, I was not in my barracks. I was surrounded by what would be termed grays. Little gray fuckers. Large eyes, gray skin, little fuckers. And I remember struggling as much as I could. And my memory is very patchy during that. I have moments that I remember and then nothing. But when I woke up again in my bunk, my first thought was, where am I? And I was startled, I was scared. I looked around, and it was one, logically, I had been in the barracks and so forth for about 2 weeks every day. I should not have been that disoriented. I shouldn't have been disoriented at all. But I was that morning when I woke up. And when I woke up, there was no idea going back to sleep. I was awake. I got up and I was outside smoking, and a sergeant came out, and I told him what had happened. And I was literally, I was shaking. He blew it off, but it ended up leading directly into the battle that I was going to have with the Army. I found out I wasn't going with my unit to Iraq, and it ended up, the end of that 3-week period, I was handed a paper that was the official Army position regarding this, and essentially it was accusing me of having delusional disorder. I was pissed. I initially had the thought of, I am going to fight this and bring in all of the evidence that I can muster regarding the subject of extraterrestrials and aliens. And there is a mountain of fucking evidence. Well, it was my neighbor at the time that he said something to me that changed my approach to this. Because the sergeants in my unit were of the opinion that I was done. That when it comes to something like this and the United States Army, they didn't see a way that I would be able to go through the process that was coming and remain in the military. It seemed to them a foregone conclusion that I was going to be discharged, medically discharged, and so forth. Well, my neighbor had approached me, and him and I would talk about this, and he had used an analogy of football teams. And he had said, if a high school football team takes on a professional football team, who's going to win? I was like, the pros, obviously. He said, you take on the Army, who's going to win? I was like, good point. He didn't suggest a course of action, but what he said did cause me to change my approach. That instead of going in armed for bear on the subject of extraterrestrials and so forth, what I focused on was the paper that they had given me that had said on it delusional disorder. So I went online and I ended up writing a 10-page report that I called Debunking Delusional Disorder. And it was one that I wrote it and then I sanitized it, which, for those that don't know, sanitizing something is cleaning it up. When I wrote it with all the shits and fucks and motherfuckers that I would when talking about it. And when I went back to clean it up, I basically edited out the foul language. Essentially cleaning it up for the military, making it look all nice and pretty. Well, I went into this, I had a video conference with a doctor. And I went in to that video conference with the 10-page report that I had written, as well as the pictures of the back of my neck that I had taken with a webcam. And that was fucking weird, because I was going to discard the pictures as just being weird, and something in the back of my mind had said invert the colors. When I did, the face jumped out at me. It was really freaky. I don't think I have that picture anymore, and I had done a YouTube video where I showed that, but I honestly don't know where that image would be anymore. It was disturbing, to say the least, because there was the face that was right at the center of the back of my neck, and it was a definite alien face, and what is believed to be the gray type of face, large eyes, so forth. But the doctor had read the report that I wrote, and he wasn't so much interested in that. I mean, that he had acknowledged what I had said in there was basically logically valid, and I made good points. Because what I did in that report was I broke down delusional disorder. And I found a questionnaire that was related to delusional disorder, and I answered that questionnaire in 2 different ways. And I drew a distinction in how I would answer it. The one was as a religious person, and the other was as an atheist talking about aliens. And I showed with each question basically the contrast. And what I had pointed out to this doctor was everything I had said regarding the subject of aliens. If I had said angels instead of aliens, it would have been, oh, he's a Christian. And nothing would have come of it. I'd have gone to Iraq with my unit. But because I use the word alien and not angel, then it's delusional disorder. And that was something I had pointed out, that this is prejudice. This is not based on evidence. This is not based on fact. This is based on nothing but prejudice. Sheer prejudice. And essentially, within 90 minutes, I was medically cleared, which absolutely stunned the sergeants in my unit. But in that conversation, at the end of it, essentially he told me, regarding the aspect of aliens, shut the fuck up. Don't talk about this. Basically, he gave me a warning of, do not talk about aliens, or you're going to end up in some hospital basically being poked and prodded. And I was like, I don't like being poked and prodded by aliens. I sure as hell don't want to be poked and prodded by the United States military. It was just, hell no. I'm not going to say a fucking thing. No. He had asked me if I ever had head injuries, and I was like, oh, I know where this is fucking headed. It's like, yeah, multiple times in my life I've had injuries, concussions type of thing. So he tried going with the idea that because I've had head injuries and concussions, that somehow leads to this alien idea. Okay, fine, I don't care. Because I was asked in a questionnaire before going into this, basically, what do I want? I have no doubt if I would have said in that questionnaire that I want to be discharged, that the Army would have given me that. But I was looking at it from a monetary sense. When I enlisted, I got about a $10,000 enlistment bonus. And it was one, I had gotten half of it when I got done AIT, and I would get the other half about halfway through my contract. And that was where I was approaching that period. So it was one, if I wanted that other $5,000, I had to stay in the Army. And I had said in that I want to fulfill my contract, that I had taken an oath that I would serve 6 years, and that's what I want to do. And I was very firm in that. Well, in 90 minutes, I was medically cleared and able to go back to my unit and so forth, to the absolute shock and so forth of sergeants in my unit. When I got back to my unit, the sergeants in my unit the first thing they said to me is, I want to read that report. They wanted to see the 10-page report that I had written. And I handed it to them because it was photocopied and sent to this doctor. But I had all of the paperwork that I went in with. To back up a little bit, the doctor didn't want to talk about what was in my report because he had read that, and basically he gave me a nod to everything that was in there. What he wanted to know about was my first missing time experience. So I told him about it. And he had remarked about the detail, and I didn't understand. And he had said the level of detail to your memories can be threatening to some people. Because I had asked him when I went in, has he reached a conclusion about me being delusional? Because if he has, then no matter what I say, it's not going to matter, because he's going to have this idea that you are delusional, thus so forth. And he had said no, he did not have any preconceived notions. And I was okay, good. Because if he had, I would have basically been, there's no point in talking to you, because you've already reached a conclusion. But he had told me that there was one point he had asked people if it was proven that aliens existed, would that change your religious beliefs? He said some said yes, some said no. He said one woman attacked me with her cane. It was just, he was aware of how sensitive a subject the idea of aliens is. But I had people, when I first had missing time, that had asked why I didn't openly talk about it. And I had said then that I didn't trust basically not being labeled crazy. And that turned out to be quite valid, because when my unit went to Iraq and I wasn't going with them, I was looking at basically potential homelessness, because I was planning on going to Iraq with my unit, and when I wasn't, that threw things that I had planned into chaos. And at one point, I had the idea of talking to crisis intervention. It was a decision that I would come to regret, but it is one I will never talk to those fuckers again. I do not care. No event in my life could be worse than talking to those fucktards. The reason I say that is they had asked why I wasn't going with my unit, and I figured, well, in for a penny, I'm in for a pound. So I told them. And I ended up being in a room with I guess he was a police officer, but he had black gloves on. And I was like, what the fuck are you going to do? I was very irritated at what was happening. Essentially, I was forced to be injected with a drug. Found out later it was Haldol. It is an antipsychotic. I do not have delusional disorder. I do not have any of the psychotic symptoms that it treats for. But one thing that did start happening right after that was I was shaking. I could not stop shaking. And it was something that I had been committed to a psychiatric unit for 3 days. And it was one, I was in contact with sergeants in my unit, and they basically told me, get through it. That I would be fine. That everything with the military, it would be fine. That this was not going to affect my military service. Because I mentioned aliens to crisis intervention, they automatically assumed and determined that I had delusional disorder. This gets into the prejudice that is related to delusional disorder. I'm going to pause with this and read to you from verywellmind.com on what is a delusion. Delusions are defined as fixed, false beliefs that conflict with reality. Despite contrary evidence, a person in a delusional state can't let go of these convictions. Delusions are often reinforced by the misinterpretation of events. Many delusions also involve some level of paranoia. For example, someone might contend that the government is controlling our every move via radio waves, despite evidence to the contrary. Delusions are often part of a psychiatric disorder. They may occur along with hallucinations, which involve perceiving something that isn't really there, like hearing voices or feeling bugs crawling on your skin. Signs. Delusions are characterized by an unshakable belief in things that are not true, and often there is a continued belief in the delusion despite contrary evidence. Not all delusions are the same. Some might involve non-bizarre beliefs that could theoretically occur in real life. Others may be bizarre, fantastical, or impossible. The nature of the delusional symptoms may play a central role in the diagnosis. Delusional disorder, for example, is characterized by non-bizarre delusions that often involve the misinterpretation of an experience or perception. In schizophrenia, the delusions may be bizarre and not rooted in reality. There are types of delusions. Erotomatic. In this type of delusion, an individual believes that a person, or usually a higher social standing, is in love with them. For example, this type of delusion would be somebody who believes that an actress loves them and that they are communicating with them via secret hand gestures during their TV show. Grandiose. In grandiose delusions, an individual may believe they have extraordinary talent, fame, wealth, or power despite a lack of evidence. An instance of this type of delusion would be somebody who believes God gave them the power to save the universe, and every day they complete certain tasks that will help the planet continue on. I find it interesting that they mention God in grandiose, but don't make any correlation to religious belief in any of this. But then there is persecutory. An individual with persecutory delusions believe they are being spied on, drugged, followed, slandered, cheated on, or somehow mistreated. An example might include someone who believes their boss is drugging the employees by adding a substance to the water cooler that makes people work harder. This one I want to pause with because it relates to an idea that kids had at basic, that when I was at pre-basic, there was, right before we were, back up and explain what pre-basic is. It's not actually basic, it's termed reception, because not everybody arrives at the same time. So during reception, you are gathered together in a barracks and you're going to chow at 3 times a day type of thing, but you're not officially in the Army yet. You're not at basic yet. You're just kind of in limbo. And this is, you're not in your Army uniform. You're in basically, it's like sweatpants type of thing. You're not really in the Army yet type of thing. Well, there was one point right before we were to go to our unit, the one sergeant that we had basically opened it up for questions, a bull session, that people could ask anything they want. And some asked the question, and it was funny as hell. They asked, do they put saltpeter in the food? It was funny as hell because the sergeant had said, and I'm going to quote him here, he said, I eat the same food you do, and I go home at night and have nude combatives with my girlfriend. Combatives is basically wrestling. It is the Army version of what would essentially be MMA. It wouldn't involve strikes, it would just be the grappling and so forth. And it was one, what they were asking was basically, at basic, why were the males not having, to use the blunt term, a hard-on. And the sergeant had said, think about it logically. You are under tremendous stress. Not to mention, you are in a bay with 50 other guys. You are not going to be having that type of reaction, or if you do, there is another problem. But it was something I found very amusing, because when I went in, I was 32. So I fully understood why shit was not functioning like it normally does. And the aspect of stress and so forth was, the sergeant didn't say anything that hadn't already occurred to me. But it was something I wanted to include here because it was an idea that, yes, it did fit to a point with what the kids were thinking, but no, there wasn't anything being put in the food. It was more, when you're at basic or even reception before basic, it is extremely stressful. You're not going to be having erotic feelings. I can guarantee that. But another type of delusional disorder is jealous. This type of delusion, individuals might believe their partners are unfaithful. For instance, someone with this type of delusion might believe that their partner is meeting their love every time they use the restroom in a public setting. They also think that they are sending their lover secret messages through other people, like the cashier in a grocery store. Somatic. Individuals with somatic delusions believe they are experiencing physical sensations or bodily dysfunction under their skin, or that they are suffering from general medical condition or defect. For instance, someone who believes there are parasites living inside their body may be suffering from somatic delusions. Mixed or unspecified. When delusions don't fall into a single category and no single theme dominates, the delusions are considered mixed. Mental health professionals can refer to the disorder as unspecified when delusions don't fall into a specific category or delusional type can't be clearly determined. The thing is, what I am contending, and what I would contend to anyone that would try to use the term of delusional disorder, is why do you give a pass to the religious belief? Because, as my atheist audience no doubt have already realized, these ideas with delusional disorder directly relate to religious belief. The beliefs that someone have regarding a God or Jesus are just as unshakable and, I would say, untrue. Now, to the believer, their beliefs are true because of faith. But I contend a delusional person could make the same claim regarding their delusions. How can you say that person is delusional and they're holding and maintaining their delusions because of their faith in whatever, and yet this is somehow different from your religious, what I would say is delusion, that you maintain because of your faith? This is why I feel the atheist position is a much more logic-based position. But the religious would definitely not like the implications that come from if somebody is classified as being delusional, because then that would mean religious belief is a delusional disorder or a delusional state, and then you can have very powerful psychiatric drugs forced upon you, like I had with Haldol. And to jump back to that, when I was in the hospital basically being evaluated, I didn't give them any issues. I had asked them, and I was given the patch because of being a smoker and not being allowed to smoke. But I was also having another issue that when I saw my sister right after, she had remarked about it, and that is I was shaking. My hands and so forth, I couldn't stop shaking. And she had asked me about it. Why are you shaking? It was something you would think a doctor and so forth would have seen that. If my sister noticed, I don't see how a doctor wouldn't have. But before I was released, I had not given them any issues, no problems. And the doctor that I had arbitrarily doubled the dose of Haldol. And the last meeting I had with him, he had mentioned to me that Haldol can cause diabetes. I snapped at him and basically jumped down his throat. I yelled at him, "Are you trying to fucking kill me?" I pointed out, I have diabetes in my family. My grandfather had diabetes, my uncle had diabetes, and my dad had diabetes. So whether it skips a generation or not, theoretically I'm fucked. I don't have it yet, but it was essentially, are you trying to fucking kill me? And he had asked me if I was going to keep taking the Haldol, and I don't normally lie. That was the only time, without hesitation, I flat out lied to him. I looked him dead in the face and was like, yep, I'll take it, knowing full damn well you can shove that prescription up your ass. When I got out, and the friend that came to pick me up, the prescription of Haldol, I took that and tossed it in the garbage. There was no way. And what happened right after, I do feel is a direct result of the Haldol. And that will get into the next program that I do on the aspect of near-death experiences. Because to give you a bit of a teaser on that one, I was in a very dark place mentally because of what I had just gone through for the past 3 fucking days. And the conditions in my life had not changed. I was still looking at homelessness type of thing. But before I wrap this up, that's going to be the next video on the next program on the subject of near-death experiences and why I don't consider them evidence, even though I've had them. But getting back to what was going on around this time, and there was a point, I think it was right before I ended up meeting with the doctor from the Army. I was working at a beer store, and I got a phone call. I would get phone calls every so often. It was nothing normal. Normally, it was nothing major, like people asking if we were still open or whatnot, or if we had a particular kind of beer. This particular call, the person never identified who they were. I answered the phone like I would normally, and they said, "We're watching you. Stop talking about the aliens." And I was like, "Who the hell are you?" And I tried playing dumb and that I didn't know what the hell they were talking about, which wasn't a total lie. I didn't know who they were, but I definitely knew with the aspect of the alien thing what that was related to, but they never identified who they were. And there was another point. I had initially thought the guys at the car wash next door must be fucking with me. And they came over at one point and I asked them about it, and they had no idea. They had said, "No, we wouldn't do anything like that," although it's funny as hell. I was just, this is really weird. And there was one point I was outside the building and I was smoking with them, and the phone rang. So I went in and answered the phone, and the person said, "We're watching you. You were just out smoking a cigarette. Stop talking about the aliens." I was officially freaked at that point, because now it's one, I don't know who this is, but they are clearly watching me. And this struck me then as being Men in Black type of thing. And I don't give into delusional type of thinking, but this was something I was getting fucking phone calls about. That, I mean, this is not something that is in my fucking head. I was freaked. And they did mention something about a day of reckoning, and I was like, that sounds like a threat. But it was around that time I mentioned this to sergeants in my unit. They tried seeing about getting me in up at the Gap so that I would be basically on base all the time, and that my civilian job would be working at the Gap where I would be drilling. And it was, to me, it would also solve so many problems, because I would be living up at the Gap and living pretty much on base. But I had interviewed with a captain, and he wanted to hire me for the position, but then the funding got cut, and I was put on a list to follow somebody that was going to be going to Iraq. Well, when the person went to Iraq, the slot got taken. And I had remarked to sergeants in my unit, does it look to you like something is trying to keep me from basically being on base all the time? I was like, this is really bizarre. They didn't understand why I was running into the barriers that I was. But what ended up happening was, the whole time I was in the Army, in the Guard, I was unable to be working in the civilian aspect in a job that was along the lines of what I was doing when I was actually in my unit. But then I had gotten a phone call at home, and initially I was freaked. And I didn't want to even talk about it until the person had acknowledged that they were a captain in the Army, and then I was like, okay. And once they identified who they were, I had no problem talking to them and so forth, but I was initially afraid that they were this unknown caller that I had gotten at the beer store. But when I wasn't able to work on base, and it was around 2009, I got to where I didn't want to leave the house when I wasn't going to drill, because I didn't trust who would be watching me or whatnot. It wasn't based on a false idea. It was based very directly on phone calls that I had gotten and weird type of shit. It was just, there was a period of time that I was afraid, because I was having the missing time. I wasn't having any more missing time, but now I had what looked like a Men in Black type of thing, watching my every move and so forth. That was just as disturbing, if not more so, than the alien issue. But I've watched what's been said and so forth in the media regarding the subject of UFOs and aliens, and it does appear that we're getting very close to disclosure. I thought it was rather interesting that Donald Trump had created what he termed Space Force, because I am aware of a connection with the aspect of extraterrestrials and so forth, And I just thought it was interesting that another branch of the military was being created in order to address things from space. Now, what that branch of the military does, I don't know, and largely I don't think it's going to be made known to the general public. But because from what I know of UFOs and so forth, our best planes are nothing compared to them. They can literally run circles around us. So I'm not sure what a Space Force would actually be able to do, other than what would essentially be pissing in the wind. But the aspect, I would be very concerned about the idea of delusional disorder if you have any type of religious belief. Because everything that I have read, and you can look it up yourself on the aspect of delusional disorder, there is no distinction made for religious belief. It's just not mentioned. And that is something that I find disturbing, because religious belief can very easily fall into the category of delusional disorder, especially the definition of unshakable beliefs in something not true. The religious would say that their God belief is true, but to somebody that is evidence-based, like an atheist, it would be, these beliefs are not true. There is no evidence to support the beliefs. So it just becomes a very dangerous position. And I can honestly see where some would be reluctant to trust the medical community, especially when your religious beliefs or personal beliefs can get you categorized as having some kind of psychosis or psychiatric disorder that you don't actually have. You just hold beliefs that are not in line with the mainstream or with approved way of thinking. And I find it disturbing that there is an approved way of thinking and a way of thinking that can get you classified as being mentally ill without actual evidence proving mental illness. Because, as is mentioned with delusional disorder, it is very difficult to diagnose delusional disorder because the delusional person doesn't believe they're delusional. Well, if it comes down to religious belief, how many people in the psychiatric field hold beliefs in a God? And would any of you, by all means, if you're a psychiatrist and you hold a belief in a God, please call me, because I'm an atheist and I would contend you're delusional. How can you be a psychiatrist and hold beliefs that fit directly in line with delusional disorder, and you do not have a clear way to diagnose a difference? If you're in the medical field and you have, especially if you're a psychiatrist, call me. By all means, I want to have a conversation. It's not going to be a nice softball conversation either. It would be one where I'm going to hold your feet to the fucking fire, because I want to know the truth. I want to know the basis of when someone is called delusional. What is it based on? I have no problem with the idea of someone being delusional if they think they're hearing demons or whatnot. Fine. But I would also contend you can't ignore the idea of religious belief. Belief that a God is able to talk to you or something, or that you have a personal relationship with Jesus or with anything. Because that would be getting into the idea of this delusional disorder that involves somebody loving you from a distance. That would definitely fit with this idea of having a relationship with a Jesus that you've never met and that you can't even prove actually exists. This is where I have big issues with the classification of delusional disorder, because it seems to be extremely subjective and open to the opinion of the one making the claim. And that is actually, I did find out that what the doctor had ultimately determined was that my belief in my missing time and so forth was no different than a religion. I had a bit of an issue with that when I heard it, because it's not a religion, but it's something that gets into personal experiences that I've had and things that were observed not just by me but by others that confirmed, to use the term, my hypothesis and the hypothesis in general society of things that fit within alien abduction. But I had far more evidence for what was happening with me than any religious person has ever had regarding their God. But it didn't sit well with me, the idea of missing time and so forth was no different than a religion. Because I had told many a sergeant in my unit at that time, one of, I don't worship aliens, I hate them. One of, I don't want to have this happening, I want to be left the hell alone. There was only one experience that I had that was actually pleasant to fun, but that gets into, I had challenged my former business partner and theistic Satanist that I had said, I want to meet your deity. And that night I ended up having an encounter with a different type of alien. It was one that would fall under the category of the Nordic. The blonde hair, blue eyes, and extremely fucking tall. But that's something I'll go into at a later time. Feel free to leave your thoughts and comments in the comment section. Later, people.